I never thought sleeping in a converted garage for 3 winters would actually save my life. While my stepmother Jessica insisted her precious son Tyler needed 2 bedrooms for his studies and privacy, I spent my high school years bundled in a sleeping bag next to Dad's old Craftsman toolbox, listening to the space heater rattle like it was about to explode. The night I turned 18, I did something that would change everything, something Jessica would never see coming. Dad had been away on another business trip when I found the insurance documents in his filing cabinet. State Farm policy, $850,000 coverage, last updated in 2014, the year Mom died. But here's the thing nobody knew, including Dad himself. After Mom's death, he'd been so devastated that he never bothered updating the beneficiary information. In his grief-stricken fog, he'd simply continued paying premiums on a policy that still listed me as the sole beneficiary. Jessica, in all her scheming and house rearranging, had assumed Dad would automatically handle the paperwork. She was wrong. That night, shivering in my garage bedroom while Tyler blasted his Xbox upstairs in his climate-controlled paradise, I discovered something that made my hands shake. Dad had actually tried to update the policy 6 months after marrying Jessica, but the paperwork had been returned by State Farm due to an incomplete notarization. Instead of following up, he'd filed it away and forgotten about it entirely. The original beneficiary, me, remained unchanged. 6 months later, when the Riverside County wildfires tore through our neighborhood like something out of hell, Jessica learned the hard way that assumptions can cost you everything. Update. Holy crap, this story blew up faster than I expected, getting tons of DMs asking about the insurance details. Promise I'll explain everything. The legal stuff gets complicated, so bear with me. Quick question though, if you discovered your step-family had been treating you like garbage while you were secretly entitled to everything, would you have kept quiet? Let me back up 3 years to when this nightmare started. Dad met Jessica at some corporate mixer in Orange County. She was recently divorced with a 13-year-old son working as a pharmaceutical sales rep. Tyler was one of those kids who looked like he'd never faced adversity in his life. All designer clothes and that entitled smirk that screamed, "My mom will fix this." The warning signs were there from day one. Jessica had this way of making comments that sounded caring but cut deep. When Dad introduced us, she looked at our modest 3-bedroom house in Riverside and asked if we'd considered downsizing since it was just the 2 of us now. When she saw pictures of Mom around the house, she suggested it might be healthier to pack them away so we could move forward as a new family. Dad was still grieving Mom's sudden heart attack and completely blind to Jessica's manipulation. Within 6 months, she'd essentially moved in. Tyler got my old bedroom because, according to Jessica, growing teenage boys needed more space than I did. I got moved to the converted garage Dad had been using as a workshop. The garage wasn't insulated. During Riverside's blazing summers, it felt like sleeping inside an oven. In winter, my breath came out in clouds. Jessica bought me a small space heater from Target, acting like she was being generous. She told Dad it would build character and help me become more self-reliant. Dad, desperate to make his new relationship work, convinced himself this was temporary. 3 years. 3 years of watching Tyler complain about his Wi-Fi speed while I did homework by flashlight when the garage's single outlet couldn't handle both the heater and my laptop. 3 years of Jessica cooking elaborate dinners for her boys, while I survived on microwave meals from the 7-Eleven down the street. 3 years of pretending I didn't care when neighbors asked why I was always entering through the side door. The insurance discovery happened by accident. I'd been looking for my birth certificate to apply for a part-time job at Best Buy when I found Dad's important documents folder, that State Farm policy, with Mom's name crossed out in blue ink and mine written underneath in Dad's shaky handwriting from 2014. No Jessica, no Tyler, just me. The Thomas fire started on December 4th, 2017. I remember the exact date because it was Tyler's 16th birthday, and Jessica had thrown him this massive party with catered food and a DJ in our backyard. I'd been working my shift at Best Buy, selling overpriced HDMI cables to confused parents, when my co-worker Marcus showed me the news on his phone. The fire had jumped Highway 33 and was heading straight for our neighborhood. I drove home through smoke so thick my Honda's headlights barely cut through it. Ash fell like gray snow on my windshield. The party was already breaking up, parents rushing to collect their kids as evacuation orders spread through the area. Jessica was in full panic mode, screaming at Tyler to pack his gaming setup while Dad tried to load important documents into his truck. Nobody had thought to check on me in the garage. I found them in the driveway, Dad's Ford F-150 loaded with Jessica's jewelry box, Tyler's PlayStation, and what looked like every photo album from their relationship. Dad looked relieved when he saw me. Jessica looked annoyed, like my survival was an inconvenience. We drove to the Red Cross shelter at the community college, joining hundreds of other displaced families sleeping on cots in the gymnasium. Jessica complained constantly about the accommodations, the noise, the food. Tyler whined about the Wi-Fi. Dad tried to keep everyone's spirits up, talking about insurance claims and rebuilding. That's when Jessica made her fatal mistake. Sitting on that uncomfortable cot, surrounded by families who'd lost everything, she started planning our new life. She talked about how the insurance money would let us build a bigger house, maybe in a nicer neighborhood. Tyler could have his own gaming room. She could have the walk-in closet she'd always wanted. She even mentioned converting the garage into a proper guest room. The irony wasn't lost on me. The next morning, Dad went to file the insurance claim. I'll never forget the look on his face when he came back from the State Farm office 4 hours later. Complete bewilderment, like someone had just told him gravity worked backwards. Jessica noticed immediately. Dad sat down on his cot, staring at the insurance paperwork in his hands like it was written in a foreign language. The adjuster had been very clear. The policy was still active, premiums current, but the beneficiary listed was not who Dad expected. Jessica grabbed the papers from his hands. I watched her face transform as she read, confusion melting into disbelief, then crystallizing into pure fury. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the document so tight I thought she might tear it in half. What happened next was 3 days of pure chaos. Jessica immediately demanded to speak with the insurance company directly. She spent hours on the phone with State Farm representatives, her voice growing shriller with each conversation. The adjuster explained patiently that the last beneficiary change request they'd received had been incomplete, missing proper notarization, and therefore invalid. The policy remained as originally written after the policyholder's wife's death in 2014. Dad looked like he'd been hit by a truck. He kept muttering about paperwork he was sure he'd filed, forms he thought he'd completed. Jessica accused the insurance company of losing documents, threatened lawsuits, demanded to speak with supervisors. But the records were clear. Digital timestamps, IP addresses, paper trails, everything pointed to the same conclusion. No valid beneficiary change had ever been processed. On day 3, Jessica cornered me near the Red Cross coffee station. Her mask of maternal concern had completely fallen away, replaced by something cold and calculating. She accused me of somehow manipulating the situation, of taking advantage of Dad's grief, of being ungrateful after everything she'd done for me. I just stared at her. This woman who'd forced me to sleep in an unheated garage for 3 years, who'd served me microwave dinners while cooking elaborate meals for her son, who'd constantly reminded me that I wasn't real family. I don't know what you're talking about, I said quietly. 8 weeks later, State Farm issued the settlement check. $847,000 minus legal fees and processing costs. The final amount deposited into my newly opened Bank of America account was $673,000 update. The insurance investigation was actually way more intense than I originally mentioned. State Farm brought in forensic accountants, checked digital records going back years, even interviewed Dad multiple times. The incomplete paperwork from 2015 saved my ass. Turns out Dad had tried to add Jessica, but never followed through on the notarization requirement. His lawyer confirmed everything was legitimate, though Dad still looks at me weird sometimes. Jessica tried everything to contest it. She hired a lawyer who specialized in insurance fraud, claiming I'd somehow manipulated the system. The investigation lasted 3 months. They examined every digital footprint, every document, every interaction Dad had ever had with State Farm. When they found that incomplete 2015 form tucked away in Dad's files, the one he'd never properly submitted, Jessica's case collapsed entirely. The media attention was surreal. Local news picked up the story. Riverside teen receives insurance payout after wildfire destroys family home. They interviewed neighbors who remembered seeing me enter through the garage door. Teachers who knew I'd been working part-time jobs since sophomore year. Jessica tried to spin it as a family tragedy, but the optics were devastating. A stepmother who'd forced her husband's son to live in the garage while her biological child enjoyed 2 bedrooms. The story practically wrote itself. Tyler's friends at school heard about the money first. Suddenly, the kid who used to mock my garage apartment was asking if I needed help managing my windfall. Jessica started leaving voicemails, her voice honey-sweet, talking about healing and moving forward as a family. Dad sent awkward text messages suggesting we all sit down and figure out a plan together. But I was done figuring out plans with people who'd never included me in theirs. The guilt hit me hardest during those first few weeks after receiving the money. I'd lie awake in my motel room. I'd rented my own place rather than share space with them, wondering if I was wrong to keep everything. Dad had raised me, fed me, put a roof over my head, even if that roof was a garage. Was I being selfish? Vindictive? Then I'd remember Jessica's voice as she planned her dream house with my insurance money. I'd remember 3 years of freezing winters and sweltering summers. I'd remember being treated like an inconvenience in my own home. The guilt faded pretty quickly after that. The revenge was simpler than Jessica expected and more devastating than she could have imagined. I bought a house. Not just any house, a beautiful 4-bedroom craftsman in the hills above Riverside, with central air, hardwood floors, and a view of the valley that looked like something from a real estate magazine. The mortgage company practically threw money at me. Turns out being an 18-year-old with $670,000 in verified insurance proceeds makes you an extremely attractive borrower. Jessica, Tyler, and Dad were still bouncing between extended-stay motels and FEMA trailers 8 weeks after the fire. Dad's consulting business had been struggling even before losing his home office, and now with no stable address and his credit cards maxed out, he was barely keeping clients. The first time they visited my new house, Tyler actually cried, not because he was happy for me, but because my guest bedroom was larger than the trailer they'd been assigned by emergency services. Jessica stood in my living room, staring at the fireplace, the hardwood floors, the mounted flat screen, calculating everything she'd lost. Dad tried to have the conversation about family responsibility, about using my windfall to help everyone get back on their feet. He suggested we could all find a place together, start fresh, maybe use this as an opportunity to rebuild our relationships, along with our lives. I listened politely while he laid out his vision of our collective future. Then I said no, not angrily, not dramatically, just no. I had my own life to build now, my own future to plan. I suggested he might want to explore FEMA assistance programs or look into temporary housing vouchers through the county. Jessica's careful composure finally cracked. She accused me of being cold, calculating, ungrateful. She brought up every dollar she'd ever spent on my food, every time she'd driven me somewhere, every small kindness she claimed to have shown me over 3 years. I pointed out that those small kindnesses had come with a side of sleeping in an unheated garage, while her son enjoyed a climate-controlled bedroom with an attached bathroom. That was the last time we spoke civilly. The legal pressure started 3 weeks later. Jessica had found a lawyer willing to take her case on contingency, claiming I'd somehow defrauded the insurance company or manipulated Dad during his grief period. The accusations were specific enough to be worrying: conspiracy to commit insurance, fraud, elder abuse, undue influence on a vulnerable adult. My own lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in insurance law, was expensive but worth every penny. She walked me through the investigation process, helped me understand my rights, and most importantly, made sure I didn't say anything stupid during the depositions. The case dragged on for 6 months. Jessica's legal team demanded access to my phone records, my computer, even my high school transcripts, looking for any evidence of premeditation or fraud. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. Just a grieving father who'd failed to complete paperwork and a stepson who'd discovered he was luckier than he'd realized. When Jessica's lawyer finally dropped the case, citing insufficient evidence and mounting legal costs, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, but exhaustion. The constant stress of potential litigation, of having my character questioned and my motives examined, had taken a toll I hadn't anticipated, but I was free. Legally, financially, and finally emotionally free from the family that had never really wanted me anyway. 3 years later, I graduated from UC Riverside with a degree in business administration and 0 student debt. Dad and I have coffee occasionally now. Awkward meetings where we discuss safe topics like sports and weather, carefully avoiding anything that might lead back to insurance policies or family dynamics. He looks older now, worn down by years of financial instability and Jessica's constant bitterness. The consulting business never fully recovered from the fire's disruption. They live in a modest apartment in Moreno Valley, sharing space that's probably smaller than Tyler's original bedroom. Jessica still believes I stole something that rightfully belonged to her family. I see it in her eyes the rare times we cross paths at Target or CVS, that mixture of resentment and disbelief that her careful plans had unraveled so completely. Tyler's doing better, working part-time while attending community college, and he seems to have developed some perspective about his early years of privilege. I never moved out of that house in the hills. It's truly mine now, in a way the garage never was and the family home never could have been. I run a small property management company from my home office, managing rental properties for other investors. The irony isn't lost on me. I've become the landlord I always needed but never had. Sometimes I think about alternate versions of this story. What if Dad had properly completed that beneficiary change in 2015? What if Jessica had treated me with basic human decency? What if I'd spoken up earlier about the garage situation instead of suffering in silence? But those are different stories, with different endings. In this one, sleeping in a garage for 3 years taught me self-reliance that no amount of family warmth could have provided. Jessica's cruelty inadvertently prepared me for the independence that sudden wealth requires, and Dad's oversight, tragic and accidental as it was, gave me the foundation to build a life that's entirely my own. I'm not angry anymore. Anger was useful for a while, helping me stand firm against family pressure and legal threats, but it's exhausting to maintain, and ultimately unnecessary. I have everything I need now: financial security, personal space, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from surviving something that was meant to break you. Update: 5 years out now, and the story still gets wild reactions whenever I share it. Dad reached out last month asking if I'd co-sign for a business loan. Jessica apparently convinced him to invest their remaining savings in some cryptocurrency scheme that went nowhere. Told him no, obviously, but suggested a good financial advisor. Tyler's actually doing well, transferred to a 4-year school, and seems to have learned some hard lessons about entitlement. As for Jessica, some people never change their perspective, even when reality forces them to change their circumstances. Would you have helped your dad with that loan, knowing it meant helping her too?